What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with some more Android content. And this video is going to be similar to my last video, where I was sort of going through the standard good stuff, Beast Spellcaster, Tomato Control sort of deck. But I did make some slight changes to the deck used in that video that I think helps it out a lot. I don't think that this build is perfect by any means. In fact, after the games that I played, I actually made another change to the deck. But that's what this sort of deck really needs, is just, playing a bunch of games and then fine-tuning it based on how you feel with the games that you've played. So this is likely going to be a process that I show off a couple more times on my channel as well. Don't worry though, next video I'm going to be playing something a bit more jank than this list, but given that this deck is like the most prevalent deck in Android format, I think it is good to take the time to fine tune it and show what that fine tuning process can look like. So here's my sort of first take on this deck, based heavily off of Kesha's topping list from the latest Android format tournament that I covered in my last video. Now, I'm not going to go as deep into the deck breakdown as I did in my last video. If you want that sort of deep breakdown, then watch that. I'm more going to focus on the things that I changed. So the big thing that I changed was I added a Gemini Elf and a Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, because as I said, I really felt the lack of monsters in certain points of the last matches that I played. So I wanted to add more monsters to make it so that I had more consistent aggressive pressure. I was debating also adding a third Bazoo, but given that Bazoo really needs to draw on graveyard resources to be useful, I felt like playing it at 3 could actually turn it into a bit more of a brick than it normally is, so I feel like 2 is fine, especially because it can be searched off of Witch of the Black Forest, so it's not the hardest card to find. So I think 2 is still fine for this. Also, in deciding what to take out to put in these beaters, I actually had a really tough choice. Because the deck space is so tight in a deck like this. Like, so many of the cards are so good that it was really tough deciding what to cut. In the end, I ended up cutting a copy of Time Seal, and I cut a copy of Mad Sorcerer. The Time Seal cut was something that I was considering for a bit, because I feel like it is a bit worse than Jar of Greed, even if it does serve a similar purpose. And I do value just having a sort of aggressive tool to potentially get over my opponent's beaters rather than just depriving them of a draw that could be anything. Maybe this is the wrong choice. Maybe Time Seal is a lot better than I'm giving it credit for. But that was my reasoning behind that cut. And for the Mass Sorcerer, I think that was a much harder choice, given that it is such a good card to bring out off of Tomato when you can clear the way to get in for a draw. Like, card advantage is really important in these formats. But given the more aggressive nature of this format than things like Critter format, I feel like it's a bit worse in this format than it was in that. For instance, back in Critter format, you could set Mass Sorcerer relatively safely, given that a lot less monsters in that format could actually beat over it when it's in defense mode. Here, it's a bit iffier. The only monsters that can't really beat over it are things like Witch of the Black Forest, Sangan, Tomatoes, and Cannon Soldier, and only on 2 of those are you actually getting a draw from that attack. So I think it's a bit iffier. Maybe in future builds of the deck, I'll decide that I really do want a way to push for more card advantage, and I'll add it back in. But for now, that's a cut that I made. The last major change that I made to the main deck was replacing a copy of Torrential Tribute with Trap Hole. I think in general, Trap Hole is better because you're going to be seeing more of the Beast Spellcaster matchup than anything else, and I do think that Trap Hole is better in the mirror than Torrential is, especially if we're going a bit more aggressive with adding a Kaiku and a Gemini Elf. I still do have Torrentials in the side deck in case I'm facing a more aggressive deck or a deck that has the capability to swarm the field better. But I do like the inclusion of a Trap Hole in the main deck over a Torrential. Again, maybe this is something that I'll change in the future, though. As for some other changes to the side deck, instead of the card destruction for Exodia, I put in some exchanges. I don't think Exodia will be a big deck in this format, so I may take out the exchanges in the future. But this is a really neat tool at sort of just stopping Exodia in its tracks. If you're able to exchange when they have an Exodia piece in hand, you can take that piece, and it can be really tough for your opponent to actually get it back. The additional cards in the side deck that I've added here are Cyber Jar and Morphing Jar, and these are kind of just to test out these cards a little bit. Morphing Jar is also a tool against Exodia, so that's nice, but I do think that the card is just generally good, and I think having the side deck to maybe bring in certain games just to test it out could be an interesting experiment to decide whether we actually want to include it in the main deck or not. And Cyberjar is sort of a similar thing. This is also like Torrential, just a way to deal with decks that are able to swarm the field more easily. So I do like it, and I did actually experiment with bringing this in just to see how it feels. But other than that, the deck is pretty much the exact same. I think that's all the changes that I made, because I think that the general core of the deck is super, super good and really awesome. So if you want a more in-depth breakdown of all these individual cards in the deck here, then feel free to check out my last video where I dive a lot more in depth about them. But instead of repeating myself here, I'd rather just jump into the games. But before we jump into the games, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. I'm planning on releasing a lot more Android content in the future. And also after Android, I'll be diving into future formats as well. So if you want to see my sort of journey through these historical formats, then subscribing is the best way to keep up to date. In addition, if you want to play games in any of the retro formats that I feature on my channel, then we have a Discord server. Link will be in the description down below. It's a great place to find games in these obscure and often underexplored formats. And we've also been holding monthly tournaments in these formats. So if you want a bit more of a competitive experience playing these formats, then those tournaments would be for you. This month's tournament will be in Imperial, and it's starting this Saturday. So there's still plenty of time to test out a deck and sign up. But it should be a lot of fun, so I look forward to it and I hope to see you there. And lastly, if you enjoyed the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel quite a bit. But now that that's out of the way, let's dive into these games. Okay, we've got another game against Dump Truck. This is actually not a rematch from the initial couple matches that we played. This is a game that we played later, so we both kind of updated our lists for this format. But Dump Truck is an active duelist on the Discord, so always a pleasure to feature them on the channel as well. And we're going to dive in with an immediate win on the rock, paper, scissors, so we will be going first, which is very nice. So let's see what we get in the opener. This is a pretty good opener. We would have liked a hand drip here, but you can't always get that in the opener. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do the standard play of setting Mystic Tomato, setting a Mystical Space Typhoon, and passing back to our opponent. Let's see what they do here. They're going to think a bit about this, and they're going to fire a Painful Choice, which is very good. Let's see what they send. They're going to send the 3 hand drips, of course, a Reborn and a Pot of Greed. I think we have to give them the Reborn here, as we don't really want them ripping any cards out of our hand. I mean, our hand isn't the best, so maybe we could give them a hand rip. But with no monsters in grave, Reborn's a lot less good at this point, and we can potentially play around it. And we've got removal in our hand in the form of Darkhole and Fissure, so we're feeling fine about this. We'll just give them the Reborn. Let's see if it comes back to bite us later. They're just going to set 2 and pass back to us. And we draw a Trap Hole. And we have a bit of an interesting choice here. If they set a Magician of Faith here, they've got some incredibly powerful cards to get back off of the Magician of Faith. And we do have a way to clear the Magician of Faith in hand. And we've got more monsters plus removal. So we might just want to fire the Darkhole. We can get majorly punished if they've got a Recruiter set. But I think we just want to go for it anyways. And let's see if we get majorly punished. We do indeed get majorly punished. Oof. So sending that Witch is really bad, and they'll be able to get a Bazoo off of that, which is very unfortunate. We're going to Mystical Space Typhoon targeting their back row, just to clear that out of the way in case it's something that can stop our aggressive pressure here. It's a Skull Lair, so I'm pretty happy we did that. Although it would have been a bit better to have them try and activate the Skull Lair, banish for cost, and then Mystical Space Typhoon it. But we can't always get what we want there. We're just going to banish 2 off of the Bazoo here, attack in directly for 2200, set a Trap Hole, pass back to them. So this should protect from their Bazoo. And they're actually going to fire the effect with Prio here. And this is sort of a teachable moment because, you know, firing Prio on Bazoo isn't the best because you want to make sure it sticks the landing first. And then if it does stick the landing, you can fire its effect fine. But if you fire it with Prio, then you're just losing resources if it doesn't stick the landing. So something to keep in mind in this format, Prio is a thing, but you don't necessarily want to use it on every monster that you've got. And it seems like Dump Truck realizes this in the moment as well. So we are able to clear that Bazoo, and they're going to fire a Snatch Steal on our Bazoo, which is a bit unfortunate. They're going to Reborn back their Witch of the Black Forest, and now they can get Banishing with our Bazoo, and this is always a risk that you've got to keep in mind when your opponent potentially takes Bazoo. If you've boosted it up, then they can boost it up as well on top of your boost. So this is going to be a bit brutal. They're going to banish 2 more here, pumping it up to a grand total of 2,800. So this is going to be 3,900 total. which is a bit rough. We will gain back 1,000 from the Snatch deal, but we've dropped a lot of life points. We dropped Raigeki, so we could potentially use that. But I think maybe the better choice here is to summon Cannon Soldier, attack into Witch, and then Fisher the Bazoo. We could also... we're not necessarily at risk of death here, because Bazoo will jump up to 2,500 max, so that's 3,600. I mean, they could easily have a monster with 1,500 attack, so it's a bit iffy. I think we do have to go for just hitting over this Witch of the Black Forest here. They'll grab a Kaiku, which is really rough because they'll be able to banish our graveyard here. And we're actually just going to set the Fisher instead of using it on the Bazoo. And this is a very interesting choice by us. And I think it makes sense. They've used up Reborn. If they've got Change of Heart, we probably lose anyways, given that, you know, they can just Change of Heart whatever else we bring out later. So we're just saying, you know, if you got Change of Heart, you win either way. But if you don't, and you just summon out Kaiku to attack over the Cannon Soldier and then attack in with Bazoo, that doesn't actually kill us here. So we'd rather get back the 1,000 from Snatch Deal, then potentially Raigeki their board next turn, once they've got the Kaiku on field. It's a bit of a gamble here, but it is a gamble that we're willing to take, and it looks like it potentially pays off for us here. We're still in a really rough spot. But now at least we have two ways of removing our opponent's monsters after this. They're just going to set one and pass back to us, and we draw Mystical Space Typhoon, so that gives us another potential way out. We could just Mystical Space Typhoon the Snatch Deal, get back Bazoo, Fisher away their Kaiku, and then get Banishing. And I actually do think that this is the right choice, but I actually do misplay here pretty majorly, because I'm worried that their set is potentially an Imperial Order. So I'm like, if that is Imperial Order, then if I fire Mystical Space Typhoon on the Snatch Field, then they can negate it, and I want to save the Mystical Space Typhoon to chain to the Imperial Order activation. However, I forget that Imperial Order will negate their Snatch Deal as well, so I think that I should have just fired the Mystical Space Typhoon on the Snatch Deal, but I didn't think of it in the moment. Although, actually, if we did get back our Kaiku, then since it's not boosted, we won't actually be able to do anything, and since Imperial Order's on the field, we can actually clear the Kaiku. So actually, I guess saving the Mystical Space Typhoon is probably for the best here. We're going to think a bit about this, and we're just going to fire the Raigeki, which I think makes a lot of sense. And we're just going to set this Mystical Space Typhoon, pass back to them. So I think that ultimately this is the right play. I don't actually think that was a misplay. And hopefully the Fisher will be able to deal with whatever they bring out next. They're going to bring out another Kaiku, which is really rough for us. We will lose two more monsters, or two more cards from our graveyard, not just monsters. So they'll take the Raigeki and the Cannon Soldier, pass back to us. We draw Heavy Storm, which really isn't the best here, but we can Fisher away their Kaiku and just pass back to them. Hopefully they don't have like a Bazoo. A Bazoo would kill us here, but we don't really have any way to play around that. They've got Premature Burial, though, and we're just going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon on that to prevent them from getting back to Kaiku. They're going to set and pass back to us. We draw a Mystic Tomato, which is pretty decent here. We're going to fire a Heavy Storm, but unfortunately they do have an Imperial Order. And since we're very vulnerable at this point, we're just going to set the Mystic Tomato. If that is like a Magician of Faith, they could get back like a Monster Reborn or a Pot of Greed, both of which would be pretty rough for us. But by setting the Tomato, we can sort of insulate ourselves a little bit here. So, not ideal, but we don't really have another option. They are indeed going to flip up the Magician of Faith, grab a Monster Reborn here, Dark Hole the board away, and that probably should be enough. If they Reborn our Bazoo, then they just win the game. So that will be the end of the game there. Maybe if we hadn't Dark Holed their Witch of the Black Forest at the start of the game, maybe it would have been a bit different, but we got really greedy, and it came back to bite us. So going into game 2, I think we keep the deck largely the same. I forget whether we sided in like a Morphing Jar or a Cyber Jar, but I guess we'll find out. We are going to begin here, starting off going first, because we did indeed lose that game 1. And this is a pretty decent opener. We're just going to set a Mystic Tomato, set a Jar of Greed, and set a Heavy Storm. We're doing this to try and bait them into setting more. If they use up a Heavy Storm on this, we can chain Jar of Greed to get back some value. But if they decide to just set a bunch of back row, figuring that we won't fire a Heavy Storm, we can just activate Jar of Greed, activate Heavy Storm, and potentially get a lot of advantage off of that. So they are going to fire a Change of Heart on our set. It's just a Mystic Tomato, and they're going to tribute that off for a Jinzo, which makes me really wish that we had set the Sangan instead. But I do think that the Mystic Tomato was, pretty decent if they didn't have Change of Heart. They're going to fire a Delinquent Duo on top of that, and this is potentially really bad. We need them not to hit the Sangan. Luckily, they don't, so we'll discard this Mystical Space Typhoon as well, and they'll get in for 2,400. So the Sangan provides us a lifeline here, but it's still looking pretty bad for us. We're going to set that Sangan pass back to them, and hope that they don't have a Nobleman of Crossout. They're going to Raigeki away the Sangan. We'll grab back a Cyberjar here. And they're going to summon out a Mass Sorcerer attack in for 900 and 2,400. So they will get a draw here, which is pretty rough. And main 2, they're going to set one pass back to us. We draw Mystical Space Typhoon, which isn't the best. And we are going to set the Cyberjar. And so I didn't mention this. We did side in the Cyberjar. And this is why I think Cyberjar is actually good in the deck. Because Jinzo can shut down so much. And having a searchable board clear is pretty good. So actually, based on these games that I played, I decided to switch the Cyberjar to the main deck. I think siding out a Fisher. And, who knows if that's the right choice or not. But I do think that the Cyberjar is pretty valuable. They're just going to attack into what they are pretty sure is the Cyberjar, and they are correct. So that will clear the entire board away there. And we get some good ones. 2 Kaikus is pretty nice. And these hand rips are very good after they fill up their hand here. They are going to banish 5 as well, and they get a ton of monsters. So unfortunately, their hand won't be quite as full as we'd like. And these are some pretty rough monsters too. 4-star Ladybug of Doom can really mess up our Kaikus. They've got a Kaiku of their own, and these tomatoes can just get them more monsters on top of that. So a bit rough here. We will be able to get out these 2 Kaikus, and we are going to see what they do. They're going to bring out a Kaiku and attack, and then it looks like they're going to set all of the other monsters that they've got here. So, just hiding which one with the 4-star Ladybug of Doom, I guess. And they're going to add that Dark Hold a hand. We are going to add the Duo. We're not going to put it atop of the deck. We're just going to add it, and we're going to add Confiscation and Mystical Space Typhoon as well. They are just going to crash their Kaiku into our Kaiku. And they're going to fire a Fisher on our Kaiku as well. So they've cleared our board, which is quite unfortunate. They're going to set another pass back to us. In the end phase, we're just going to Mystical Space Typhoon, use this thing up. And that is the Dark Hole, so we have depleted them of that resource, which is very nice. We're going to fire Jar of Greed, as our current hand does not really do much against their board. So we just got to hope we get lucky. And we get majorly lucky. Wow, that is a great draw. Probably the best draw we could have gotten here. We're going to fire Dark Hole, clear their board away. They will get a search off the Witch that they set. They're going to search out Kaiku, which, we've got Gemini Elf, so we can bring that out instead. However, instead of getting immediately aggressive here, I think we want to figure out what they've potentially got. So we are going to fire this Confiscation here. Get a peek at what they're working with. Looks like they've got a Kaiku, and a Bazoo the Soul Eater. So they've got a pretty big suite of beaters here. Now, of these, only Bazoo actually deals with the Elf. So we probably want to send the Bazoo, just leave them with 2 Kaikus. But this is a bit iffy here. I think we do just want to send the Bazoo. And we are indeed going to send the Bazoo. And now we have the option to send both of the Kaikus off the Duo. However, doing that will drop us down to 300 life points, which is a very, very precarious position to be in. And I think we're in such a precarious life point position that we actually want to just set the Magician of Faith here and just pass back to them. I guess we'll set this Mystical Space Typhoon as well, in case they've got just a Spell or Trap card that we want to prevent them from activating. But this is a bit worrying. We're in a very precarious position, so we don't want to summon the Elf and potentially play into something like a Fisher, as that will kill us. They're just going to bring out their Kaiku, and they're going to attack into our Magician of Faith here. We will get a search of the Dark Hole. Grab that back to hand. Main 2, they're just going to set one, pass back to us. We are just going to fire that Mystical Space Typhoon in the end phase to Call of the Haunted, so I'm glad we did that. Mystic Tomato is pretty decent. We're just going to set the Mystic Tomato, set a Delinquent Duo. We're not going to use up this Delinquent Duo anytime soon, given that they've got less than 2 cards in hand, and also we're at very, very low life points, so we might as well just set it as a bluff. And they are going to summon out a Bazoo here. So they're going to get a pretty aggressive turn here. banishing 3 off the Bazoo and attacking in to our set. Luckily, it's Mystic Tomato. And we are just going to bring out another Mystic Tomato. We could have brought out like a Recruiter instead, I think. Yeah, we still got a Witch in deck, so we could have brought that out instead. But I think we want to end on the Witch, potentially. And they're going to attack in to that Tomato. Banish 2, unfortunately. And we will be able to bring out the Witch here. They're just going to pass back to us, and we draw Mirror Force, which is pretty good. So that will serve us well later. We are just going to fire a Dark Hole here, though. Get a Search off the Witch. We're going to grab a Bazoo. And I think we're probably going to bring out the Bazoo and just start attacking in for a ton of damage. We need to put a very aggressive clock on the board here, as we are in such a precarious position. So we're going to attack in for 2,500. And we should be able to drop them down to 100 life points next turn if we summon out Elf and just do the same thing we did with Bazoo. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. They're going to fire Pot of Greed. Oh, that is potentially disastrous for us. We could play around a lot of things, but Pot of Greed makes that a lot harder to do. They're going to draw 2 Fiery Mystical Space Typhoon on our initial set, so that will clear the heavy, which we weren't really planning on activating anyways. They're going to bring out a Kaiku and just pass back to us. This will prevent us from using the Bazoo to get super aggressive here, but we do have an Elf to deal with the Kaiku. So we'll be able to attack into that and get in for 16. So if all goes well, next turn we should be able to win here. And we're going to think about whether we want to actually banish for Bazoo in the main phase 2 here. We do have a Mirror Force set up, and I think that's their third, yeah, that's the third Kaiku. So really we're just kind of worried about an Elf or another Bazoo. We do have Mirror Force, though. I think the worst case scenario, though, is like if they've got a Heavy Storm plus a Bazoo of their own, they can summon out their Bazoo, boost it up to 2,500, and attack over our Bazoo for game. So I think we might want to banish here, and indeed we are going to banish. We're going to banish 3. We've still got 9 engraved, so I think we're fine doing this, and we're going to pass back to them. So they're going to summon out a Gemini Elf. It looks like they're just going to crash into ours, and we'll just let that go through. We do have the tools to win next turn with our Gemini Elf in hand. And somehow it looks like we managed to pull out this game from the jaws of defeat. So even though we dropped down to a very low life point total, we were able to pull that out. And I think that's because we played very carefully in the late game, which is often hard to do. Android's a very aggressive format, and you can die from a variety of things out of nowhere. And there's just so many things that counter other things that it's often hard to know what to commit to. So in situations like that, it often does pay to be a little bit more defensive. And I think that being defensive paid off a lot for us. And using our removal resources wisely also helped out a lot. But that's game 2. We managed to somehow scrape that out. So hopefully we'll be able to get a win in game 3 as well and pull out the match here. So we are going to go second here as we did win game 2. And let's see what they do. This is a pretty great hand, I gotta say. Unfortunately, they've got a Pot of Greed as well, so they might get a good hand as well. They're just going to summon out Kaiku, set 1, pass back to us. We're going to try to Pot of Greed to draw a way to out that Kaiku other than just crashing our Kaiku. And Cyberjar will do that. So we might actually want to set the Cyberjar here, preserve our Kaiku for later. It's a bit iffy, and it looks like we are indeed going to do that. We're also going to set this Heavy Storm, potentially bait them into setting more back row here. Unfortunately, they've got the Nobleman of Crossout, so that will deal with our Cyberjar, unfortunately. And they will be able to get in with the Kaiku here. Banish a card from our graveyard, which is unfortunate, as if we do draw the Magician of Faith later, we could have gotten back that Pot of Greed, which would have been very nice. They are going to pass back to us. We draw Painful. Painful's really good here, actually. We're going to fire the Painful choice here, send 5, and let's see what we send. We're going to send Jinzo, a Sangan, and then 3 Jar of Greeds, because I think going second, we actually sided out the hand rips, given that they're a bit less likely to be good for us, given we are going second. And what you really want to do with the hand rips is open them going first, and then fire them on your opponent. Maybe this was not the right choice to make, but it's what I did. And I think with the inclusion of something like Jar of Greed, you do have a lot of like fodder to send off of Painful Choice that's pretty good. So I'm fine with this, and I'm really fine with this selection. If they give us the Jinzo, we reborn back the Sangan, tribute over it for the Jinzo. If they give us the Sangan, we like set the Sangan, set Call of the Haunted maybe. And if they give us Jar of Greed, it's just a draw. We can crash our Kaiku into their Kaiku potentially, or we could just reborn the Jinzo either way. So I feel pretty good about this. They are indeed going to give us the Jinzo here. So we're going to reborn that Sangan. If they had Imperial Order here, that would be really bad. So maybe we should have fired Heavy first. But I feel fine doing this, especially because we've got Call of the Haunted as a follow-up in case they do have Imperial Order. But we're going to tribute over that Sangan for the Jinzo. And now we're going to attack into the Kaiku here. Clear that Kaiku, deal them 600, pass back to them. Maybe we should have set the Call of the Haunted as well because our Jinzo is very fragile here. But if they've got a Heavy Storm set, which they might given that they didn't commit more back row, then that could be really disastrous for us. So I think we want to save the Call of the Haunted for when Jinzo's actually in grave. They're going to summon out Cannon Soldier, which is quite worrying because it means they probably have a change of heart. But luckily they've just got a Fisher, so that will clear the Jinzo, and they'll be able to get in for 14. But it's not nearly as bad as it could have been. They're just going to pass back to us now. We draw Mystic Tomato, which is pretty nice. We're just going to fire the Heavy Storm now. It seems like they're not taking the bait and setting more back row. They've got a Ceasefire, which is very interesting. It looks like they've cited in a bit of anti-flip stuff for us, given that they did see we were on Cyberjar. Ceasefire will be able to chain to the Heavy Storm and deals 500, so that could actually come up. We are just going to bring out a Kaiku here, hit over their Cannon Soldier. So that will drop them down 400, and we will be able to banish the Kaiku and Pot from their graveyard. Main 2, we're just going to set this Call of the Haunted, pass back to them. If they use Spell and Trap removal, we can bring back Jinzo. And let's see if they do indeed do that. They are indeed going to do that. We're going to fire Call, bring back Jinzo. So Mystical Space Typhoon will destroy the Call of the Haunted, but Jinzo will negate Call's effect to destroy it on the field. They are going to fire a Dark Hole, though, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe we should have brought out a Sangan from our graveyard, just in case they did have this mass board clear. But we do have a Witch in hand, and I think that we really wanted to just potentially stick Jinzo on the field to potentially get a ton of aggressive pressure if they didn't have a board clear. Unfortunately, they did, so we won't be able to do that. They're just going to set 2 and pass back to us. They do know that we've used up a Heavy Storm. We could be playing another, but they're willing to take that risk. We are going to summon out a Witch of the Black Forest, attack in for 1100 here. They're going to try activating Call of the Haunted to bring back Cannon Soldier, but we've got a Mystical Space Typhoon for it. So we will be able to prevent that Cannon Soldier from hitting the field and deal 1100 here. They're going to fire a Painful Choice of their own, which is pretty good. They're going to send 5 good ones. And this is actually a bit of an interesting choice here. I don't think we want to give them the Duo. That just depletes our hand a bit too much. Yes, we will get a search off the Witch later. But we also don't want to give them the Witch. That could be rough. The fact that they're giving us a Snatch Steal or Change of Heart to pick here might mean that they've got a Jinzo of their own in hand. So it's a bit worrying there. And Reborn can bring back our Jinzo, which would be disastrous. It's a bit iffy. Actually, Duo might be the right choice, given that we really don't want them to get a super big push here. And Duo doesn't actually give them resources, it just deprives us of ours. And I feel like I'm in a pretty good position either way here. So I think I actually might want to give them the Duo. And we are indeed going to do that. It's a really weird play, I know, because this does deprive us of some card advantage, but Witch can search out whatever beater we might need, and we've got a ton of other good monsters in hand, so I'm not too torn up about this. This also drops them down 1,000 more, which, given that we've got a ton of aggressive pressure on the board, might be worth it. They're going to hit the Bazoo, which is unfortunate, so we'll send the Cannon Soldier. Maybe we should have kept the Cannon Soldier, potentially make a big aggro push here, but I think Mystic Tomato can help us recover a bit more if we do end up in a bad position, so I'm fine with this. We're going to bring out the Mystic Tomato, and we don't fear Mirror Force, so we're just going to attack in for 25. It looks like that will hit. We're going to send a Mirror Force of our own, and I think this should potentially be the end of the game, unless they've got another mass board clear. They've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, which is pretty good here, and they will be able to summon Bazoos. They'll be able to banish 3, unfortunately, and so that'll bump Bazoo up to 2,500. They'll tag into our Tomato so we don't get an immediate search off of our Witch. And I think we'll just bring out another Tomato here. Yep, we will indeed do that. And they're just going to pass back to us. Dark Hole actually does wrap up the game here. So we fire Dark Hole, clear our Witch here, grab a Bazoo from deck. And we're just going to summon that out, banish 3, and that should be all she wrote. And it looks like it is indeed. So now we did kind of sack our way to victory in game 2, drawing the dark hole, but I do think that despite that sack, we did do a lot of skillful plays in the game itself, and we could have easily still lost the game after that dark hole if we had played a bit differently. So I do think that while these games do have some element of sacking involved, they also can be very skillful. And skillful mirrors like this match between these two decks is really, really cool. Also, the fact that there's no like agreed upon best version of this sort of beast spellcaster deck does make it so that you never quite know what your opponent's playing. Like, you don't know whether your opponent's on 2 Kaiku or 3, so that means, like, do you play around them having 3? Do you play around them having 2? There are a lot of interesting, like, considerations to make in this mirror that you don't necessarily have in other sorts of good stuff mirrors in the past that I think is really cool. But I know this is, like, the third good stuff mirror that I've showed off in the span of 2 videos. So we actually did play another game here where Dump Truck actually was playing a much different deck. So let's see how that game goes. Okay, we've got a game against Dump Truck. Unsure what they're on. We're still on the Beast Spellcaster build that I showed off in the deck breakdown. And we are going to lose the rock, paper, scissors, which is quite unfortunate. They are going to be able to go first here. And let's see what they do. Ooh, this would have been a great going first hand. Wow. That rock, paper, scissors was big. They're going to fire a painful, sending 2 hand rips and 3 other cards. That might mean that they've got a confiscation in hand already, which would be unfortunate. But of the rest, I think we want to probably give them a Snatch Steal or a Premature Burial, as we do have a heavy in hand. They could just confy that out of our hand. But it's still probably the best choice. Snatch Steal's, I don't know. We probably want to give them the pre-mat here. They've got no monsters in graveyard currently. And I feel like Snatch Steal's a bit more of a swing for them. So I think we are just going to give them the Premature Burial here. They'll get that to hand, and they're just going to set 2 and pass back to us. We draw Jinzo, which is pretty nice. We're going to fire Heavy Storm. Just to clear that back row so that way we can get in. I think maybe this is a bit greedy. We should probably save this for when they potentially have like more back row. But the way I figure it is I'm planning this turn, summoning Gemini Elf, attacking into their set. If it's like a Sangan or Witch, they get a search to hand. Then we Comfy and Forceful Sentry them out 2 cards. So I figure that I'm not too concerned with what they've potentially got. And I just want to make this play go through. It turns out that's just the pre-mat, which, you know, I'm happy to hit it. And we're just going to summon out this Witch, attack in to their Revival Jam. Very interesting. That means that they're likely on a water deck, which is very neat. Haven't really shown off that deck yet on the channel. And it is a popular rogue strategy. So cool to see Dump Truck actually representing it here. Let's see if it actually works out for them. But with Comfy and Forceful, it might not. So we do get to see their hand. We see that they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, a Mirror Force, a Reborn, and a Kaiku. I think we're honestly most afraid of the Reborn and potentially the Mirror Force. We've got Elf to deal with Kaiku. We might just want to send the Kaiku anyways. It's a bit iffy. We are indeed going to send the Kaiku. I think this is actually a misplay. I think I should have Forceful Sentry'd back the Kaiku and sent the Reborn off the confiscation. But I actually do mess up this quite a bit. I guess we don't want them to draw the Kaiku later on, but drawing a Reborn is basically drawing a Kaiku anyways. So I feel like this is not the best play. I think I misplayed here pretty majorly. And we know that they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon and a Mirror Force now. I think we should have just sent the Mirror Force off of the Forceful or Comfy instead of the Kaiku, as we do have the Elf to deal with that in hand. I guess we just don't want to banish any of our graveyard, but I don't know. I feel like it would have been much better to deprive them of the Mirror Force, because now we just got to kind of play around it. And since they can bring back Revival Jam every turn while it is doing damage, I think it's better to be able to get in a ton of damage off of the Elf. I guess because we can like tribute Jinzo out here, that's not the worst, but I don't know. This is a bit iffy. We draw Mystic Tomato, which is pretty nice. We're just going to attack into their Revival Jam. You know, we figure if they've got Mirror Force, then they're not going to want to use it on a Witch. And if we tribute out Jinzo here either way, then, you know, we'd just be attacking to Jam. So we're just going to set the Mystic Tomato, and then next turn tribute over the Witch for the Jinzo, get in a ton of damage that way. But as is, we've already dropped them down 2,000, so that's not bad. They're going to fire Raigeki, though, which is quite unfortunate. We will be able to get a card from deck. We're going to grab a Sangan, which maybe isn't the right choice. Maybe we should have grabbed a Beater, but we want more recruiters here. And they're going to summon out a Bazoo the Soul Eater, which is very rough. And since this is backed up by a likely Mirror Force, this is really, really worrying for us. They're going to attack in for 2,500. They're going to set another pass back to us. We know that the sets are Mystical Space Typhoon and Mirror Force. Mystic Tomato is pretty great, though. We can set that, bring out a monster for next turn, and potentially tribute over for Jinzo. And they might not, banish 3 off the Bazoo next time, as they are running a bit low on graveyard resources. So I feel pretty good about this. They are going to banish 3, apparently. They just want to get super aggressive here. They're going to bump up 3, switch the Revival Gem to attack, and summon out Mother Grizzly. And this is actually really, really bad for us. This is disastrous for us because with the Mother Grizzly on field, if we bring out a Tomato after they attack, then they can just crash their Grizzly into our Tomato. And we actually can't afford for that to happen, as water decks can be playing Catapult Turtle. And if they are able to bring out a Catapult Turtle here, then that might be the end of the game, honestly. So we're actually not going to use the Mystic Tomato effect. We've also used up the other Tomato here. And we don't have Mass Sorcerer in our deck anymore, or Sangan. So there's nothing that we can't bring out here that the Grizzly wouldn't be able to crash off of. So we just are going to lose the Tomato and take 2,900, or actually 3,900 points of damage here because they attacked with the Jam. So it's looking really rough for us. We really need a good top deck here in order to pull this out. And Painful Choice is probably the best top deck we can get. So we're going to fire Painful Choice and just try and find some combination of 5 that will get us out of this. And we find Dark Hole, Raigeki, both of which would be very good here. Change of Heart, because then we can Change of Heart the Bazoo, bring out Jinzo. Reborn, which could reborn one of our monsters, bring out Jinzo. And a Snatch Steal here. And Snatch Steal obviously will die to the Mystical Space Typhoon, but we don't have a 5th card in our deck that will deal with this board. So what we're trying to hope for here is that they'll potentially save the Mystical Space Typhoon, like anticipating that we've got a better card later. But that's very unlikely, so we just have to make this choice. Now, if we had had Cyberjar in the main deck here, this would have been a different story. We could have gotten the Cyberjar, set the Cyberjar, and we might have potentially still lost. We very likely would have potentially still lost, but it would have been a much less surefire thing here. Unfortunately, as is, we've got to make this suboptimal play, and that will cost us here. Maybe we could have... Now, Mirror Force would have had the same issue as Snatch Steal. So, yeah, they're going to give us the Snatch Steal, and we know that they've got Mystical Space Typhoon, but let's just hope that they won't use it here. And unfortunately they do, which is the correct choice, so that will just be the end of the game. And, that shows that the water deck has got some moves, Revival Jam did cost our opponent a fair amount of life points, but just having it as a recurable body prevented us from getting too aggressive, and they were able to use it pretty aggressively in the end there. Now, of course, maybe this all boiled down to us sending the wrong cards off the hand rips, but I think that's sort of diminishing the power of Revival Jam in that game a bit too much. So I think Revival Jam was a really neat card there, and seeing the Mother Grizzly was also really cool. So the water deck might have some potential. This game got me excited to experiment with it, and that might be the next deck that I show off on this channel. But for game 2, we will side in that Cyberjar here, as, I do think that it does belong in the main deck. That's the major change that I made after playing these matches. I swapped out a Fisher for the Cyberjar. So that's what my next build of this sort of Beast Spellcaster deck is, having the Cyberjar in the main, as I do think it's a really good piece of removal. This is a great opening hand, though. We're going to start with Pot of Greed, drawing some good ones. We'll set 2 jars here and a Witch and pass back to them. If they do have Heavy Storm, then we fire both jars, and it's not that big a deal. They're just going to set 1, set another, pass back to us, and we're going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon on their set. It's a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own, so we're just going to chain Jar as they try and destroy one of our cards. And Painful Choice is pretty great here. We're going to send the 3 hand rips, a Jinzo, and we got to think about the last one, and we're going to actually grab a Change of Heart here. We've got Cannon Soldier to pair with the Change of Heart, so that's pretty good. And, if that is like a Revival Jar or a Mother Grizzly set, this can pay off a lot for us. So they're going to give us the Change of Heart here. We're going to add that to hand. And we're just going to fire that Change of Heart. see what they've got. It is a witch, which is a little bit unfortunate. I do think we still want to bring out the cannon soldier and tribute it off. So we're going to get in for a ton of damage here. And main 2, we're just going to tribute off that witch. They will get to search out a beater here, and Kaiku is a really good one. But we are just going to set this heavy storm as bluff and pass back to them. They are indeed going to bring out the Kaiku, so this will likely get rid of our Jinzo here, which is really unfortunate. But we do have the Gemini Elf to deal with the Kaiku next turn, so it's not the worst. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Cyber Jar, which is really nice. We're going to fire this Jar of Greed, draw one, and Monster Reborn would have been really nice the turn prior. But given that the only thing that really punishes this Gemini Elf summon is like Mirror Force, because if it's Trap Hole Torrential, we can just Reborn. We are just going to go for the aggressive play, summoning out Gemini Elf and trying to attack in. And hopefully that's not Mirror Force. Luckily it isn't. And we'll be able to attack in for 1200 damage here. We'll pass back to them. And I feel really good about this board state. They're going to set 2 and pass back to us. We draw Trap Hole, which is pretty decent. And that second back row there is perfect for our Heavy Storm. So we will be able to get some value off this. It's just Skull Lair and a Mirror Force here. We're going to bring out another Gemini Elf and start attacking in here. Unfortunately, it's Mother Grizzly, so they will be able to get another monster from deck. We're going to just attack into that with the Gemini Elf. They'll probably bring out a Revival Gem or a Mother Grizzly here. And it looks like they're going to go for the Mother Grizzly instead. We're going to switch this Witch of the Black Forest to defense, set a Trap Hole here, pass back to them. And let's see what they do. They are going to fire a Reborn, and they're going to bring back their Witch of the Black Forest. Kind of worrying here. They might have a Jinzo in our future, and it looks like they will indeed. So they're going to bring out Jinzo, search out Bazoo off of that Witch, switch the Grizzly to defense, and attack in to the Gemini Elf. They're not attacking over the Witch, because if they do, then we can search out a Bazoo and get over their Jinzo. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Kaiku is okay, but not the best in this situation, really. We are just going to switch the Witch to attack to hit over the Grizzly, as actually, this might be the end of the game if they bring out a monster off Grizzly. And it is indeed. They're going to bring out a Revival Jam, so we'll be able to hit over that with the Elf, get in for 400 there. And you might wonder, why is it the end of the game? Well, the reason for that is we haven't normal summoned or set this turn. We're going to normal summon the Kaiku, Reborn targeting Cannon Soldier, and that is 2,000 life points on board. So that will be the end of the game. And I think that does show why Cannon Soldier is still valuable in this format. You know, there are better aggressive beat sticks, but Cannon Soldier can end the game like nothing else. So I think Cannon Soldier is very good. For the side decking here, I think we might side out of the hand rips again. Unclear, because we will be going second here. But I'm hoping that against a water deck, this will be fine either way. Let's see how it goes. Ooh, that's a pretty good opener. Let's just hope they don't have a hand rip for us. Pot of Greed will make it more likely that they will, unfortunately, and it looks like they do. So they've got Forceful Sentry. They get to look at our hand, and I think the clear choice here is probably Imperial Order, and it is indeed the card they send back. So they're going to send that back to the deck and bring out a 7-colored fish, set 1, and pass back to us. So they're going all in on this sort of water tribal strategy here. We could bring out Kaiku and just crash into 7-colored fish, but I think that's kind of bad. So we're just going to set a Sangan, set a Jar of Greed, pass back to them. You know, if they do attack in to the Sangan, then we get a card engrave to banish off Bazoo to get over the 7-colored fish. So I'm feeling fine about this. They're going to bring out a Giant Red Sea Snake. So they're going all in on these 1800 beaters, and they're going to activate Umi Ruka. So, you know, this is an avenue that the water deck can go down. It's very fragile to spell and trap removal. But this does boost their monsters up to 2300, which is pretty good. They're going to attack into our set here. It is Sangan, so we'll be able to get a search here. And I think we're going to search a Cyber Jar, as this will be able to clear their aggressive pressure. They're going to attack in for 2300, which is unfortunate. We will take that. Main 2, they'll pass back to us. And we draw Change of Heart. This actually gives us a bit of another option here. We're going to fire Jar of Greed just in case we draw something like Heavy Storm, which can let us deal with this without using the Change of Heart. With that Change of Heart, we actually have a better option potentially. We're going to Change of Heart their Giant Red Sea Snake, attack into their 7-colored fish here, clear both of them, and then we're going to set this Mystic Tomato and pass back to them. Mystic Tomato would be good for deck thinning here, and I don't necessarily want to commit more to board, as that would make a potential Mirror Force very tempting for them. But I think a Mystic Tomato set is pretty good. They're going to fire Premature Burial and bring back a Giant Red Sea Snake. So that's a bit unfortunate for us. They're going to attack into our set. It's Tomato. We're going to bring out a Witch, which is pretty good here. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw Fisher, which does deal with the giant red sea snake. So we're going to summon out that Kaiku, Fisher away their giant red sea snake, and try getting in here. Unfortunately, they do have a Call of the Haunted, so this will be able to bring back one of their 1800 beaters here, and they're going to bring back that giant red sea snake. We're going to switch the Witch to defense, pass back to them, and let's see what they do here. They're going to think, which is a little bit worrying for us, but let's see what they do. They're going to fight a Reborn, bring back that 7-colored fish. They've got all the graveyard recursion this game, apparently. They're going to attack over our Kaiku, inflict 5, and then attack over our Witch. We will get a search here. And we're going to think about exactly what to search. We're going to grab a Magician of Faith. This will be able to get back the Change of Heart, which is very good. And they're just going to go to main 2 and pass back to us. We draw Call of the Haunted, which is really nice. And that's actually a bit of insulation, which is pretty good. So I was thinking about, maybe we go for the Cyberjar play here. But with the Call of the Haunted, we might actually want to go for a Bazoo instead. If they do have some way to clear the Bazoo, or like a Snatch Steal to take control of the Bazoo, then we can always call the Haunted back like a Mystic Tomato from our graveyard, which will provide us some insulation. So I think I actually do want to go for the Bazoo play here. And maybe this is a little bit greedy. I think maybe I should have gone for the Cyberjar play instead. Because if I go for the Cyberjar play, I'll get a fair amount of draws. And that could potentially draw me into something to get rid of the Umuruka and Call of the Haunted. But I think I just want to go for the Bazoo, given the insulation on the Call of the Haunted. Also, Cyberjar could majorly backfire for me while Umuruka is on field. So, there's a lot of things to consider with both of these plays. Main 2, we're just going to set 1 and pass back to them. And unfortunately, they have a Mystical Space Typhoon here. We will be able to Chain Call, get back Witch, and, get a search off this, which is okay. But if they've got some way to deal with the Bazoo, then we're in a bit of trouble here. I think we're okay, ultimately, as long as they don't have, like, Change of Heart or Snatch Steal. But unfortunately, it looks like they do. So that will indeed be the end of the game there. So Water managed to actually take a game off of the Beast Spellcaster Tomato Control Good Stuff deck. Now, some of that may just be through my misplays. I think looking back on these games, there were some decisions that I made that really came back to bite me. But I do think that it does show how powerful this Water deck can be if they are able to stick their cards on field. If we had drawn like a Mystical Space Typhoon or a Heavy Storm at any point in this game, then I think this game 3 would have gone a lot differently. But, sometimes you just don't draw those. And if you can bait your opponent into using up those spell and trap removal cards on other things instead, then you could have smooth sailing, pun intended. But I do think that these games were really valuable in showing off more of the Beast Spellcaster deck and also just enabling me to fine-tune the deck more to my preferences. I do think Cyberjar in the main is a good inclusion in this format, especially given a lot of the aggressive beaters in this format. So I will be including it in the main deck in the Beast Spellcaster deck from now on. But, I'll save that for future videos. I know that y'all are probably a little bit tired of the Beast Spellcaster mirrors, so I did want to show off this sort of like Water jank deck that I did play against and did lose against to show that, jank decks can win in this format. And given that jank decks can win in this format, I think my next video will be showing off a jank deck. Not sure if I'm going to go with Water for my next video or if I'm going to go for a different sort of strategy, but I will be experimenting with a variety of decks in the future, so even if I don't cover it in the next video, I will be covering all these sort of jank strategies on my channel in the future. But let me know in the comments what you think of the changes I made and what changes you would make to these sorts of decks. Also, let me know what you think of the Water deck. I think it looked really sick here, even though it was a little bit fragile in Game 3. I look forward to talking to you in the comments below, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.